Yes, and I will share screen when we start the presentation.
Wonderful. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Start the presentation.
Are you guys ready to start right now?
We're ready.
Already,
So you're live.
Just give me a minute.
just let us know. Thanks, Jared.
Are you guys
We're starting.
are you guys ready to start right now?
Yes,
We're ready.
we're ready.
Already. All right. Thank you all for joining us both in person and virtually. It is Monday, March 10th at 10:05 a.m. And we are here at 1520 Market Street for a public hearing to take public comment and share an update regarding CDA's notice of funding availability, where through 4 different funding opportunities, we're making about $15 million available, primarily for the development of affordable housing, but also for neighborhood plan implementation. My name is Noel Pfeffer. I serve as Executive Director of the Community Development Administration. I'm joined by Bill Rotha, our Director of Housing, and by Tom Nagel, our Public Information Officer. And with that, Tommy, if you can share the slides on our virtual screen, we can go ahead and get started. We'll start just by providing a little bit of context and background about CDA and our work around housing and our strategy to date. And then we'll dig into each of the 4 funding opportunities. And then we will open it up for public comments and questions. I also want to note that this is the first step in our, well, it's really not the first step. It is yet another step in our ongoing dialogue with the public around these funding opportunities. This grows out of the engagement we did as part of our consolidated plan, where we consistently heard that housing is the #1 priority for city residents. And it also builds, will continue on April 24th with a full day workshop dedicated to this NOFA. So from 9 to 4 here at 1520 on April 24th, our staff will be going through the NOFA in excruciating detail to answer any questions that folks may have about applying, how to fill out the pro forma and others. This is really an opportunity to have a bigger picture conversation about the funding opportunity and the priorities and the strategy. And then there will be that follow-up opportunity on April 24th, full day dedicated to the NOFA and answering prospective applicants' questions. So with that, just a little bit about CDA. We serve as a clearinghouse for a variety of federal and state and local funds for the city of St. Louis with a particular focus on housing and economic justice. We partner with an array of developers, nonprofits, public partners to drive economic justice initiatives. And for the past 4 years, we've committed over $250 million in partnership with these array of partners to help leverage over $1 billion in development, specifically focused on housing. We're currently working on over 100 projects that collectively sum to about $850 million in development with $100 million in city funding. So we're excited to continue that work. CDA was founded in 1974. I like to note that federal funding for CDBG and CDA had kept pace with what it was in 1980. It would currently be at the federal level instead of 3.3 billion, about 14 billion. And that means that St. Louis, instead of receiving 18 million a year, would receive closer to $90 million a year. We're now in an environment, obviously, where these funds are under threat, but I think it's worth bearing in mind that the reality is that they have been systematically cut back over the last 50 years. And so the true need is obviously extraordinary. And then over time, CDA has kind of been broken up into different entities. The planning department spun off from CDA. SLDC was established as an independent entity. The Affordable Housing Commission was established as an independent entity. But at the end of the day, these 4 development agencies all continue to work hand in hand towards economic justice. And then another keynote is that HUD has really raised the bar on us following a monitoring visit in 2012. really calling on us to strengthen our open and competitive selection processes, because frankly, beforehand, before 2012, some CDBG funds were really being used by aldermen for their pet projects, and there was a lot of political influence. And since then, we've really enshrined this open and competitive funding process that really defines our notice funding abilities. Every project is reviewed by 3 staff independently and rated on the basis of the evaluation criteria that I'll go through today. And that has been relatively consistent over the last 2 years. Next slide. The way we work, we're really made up of 3 operating divisions. We have our fiscal team that keeps the money moving, accountants, fiscal manager, and just an amazing team of financial experts that are really our engine. And together they've massively scaled CDA from in 22, we deployed about $24 million in federal funds. In 23, it was over 46 million. In 24, it's, I believe, over 60 million. So we've been scaling to meet the demands of the moment. So grateful for theirs and our whole team's work. Our compliance team is made up of our director of compliance, grants managers, program managers, grants administrators, community development specialists who navigate the contracting process from beginning to end. However, they don't manage our housing projects. Our housing projects are managed by our construction team and housing team led by Bill, made up of engineers and analysts, each of which manage a portfolio of projects. While the analysts manage a portfolio project, our engineers go out and visit and monitor construction, review design drawings, and ensure that everything on the front end and during construction is up to ours and HUD standards. Next slide. So really kind of the starting point for our strategy. And again, this is the higher level strategic conversation context for our NOFAs, is that St. Louis from 1950 to 2020 has lost an enormous amount of population from 857,000 to 300,000. And that has left extraordinary scars on our city, the Delmar Divide, collapsed homes and vacant lots. And we understand that although tragically in the 60s and 70s, as the city was hollowing out, the city's policy and HUD's policy was to concentrate poverty by building these enormous high rises like Rodrigo and really concentrate poverty. That's not the solution in our moment, and that rather we have to turn our vacant lots and properties into an asset and deconcentrate poverty and seek to really bring these beautiful historic housing stock back online and revitalize and transform our city. And so we think we have an enormous opportunity to do that with housing, and affordable housing is one of those tools for neighborhood revitalization, not alone, in partnership and together with, if we go to the next slide, together with investments into early childcare, health centers, grocery stores, pharmacies, community gardens, and small businesses to form a regenerative ecosystem, a set of holistic investments that can help drive economic justice. Because again, we know that equity and economic justice is not just a moral imperative, but it's an economic imperative. It's a precondition to growth. And there's a lot of good data to support that. We also understand that this is what city residents are calling for. When we did a survey of over 1% of city residents, we received over 3,000 responses. The #1 priority that city residents raised was neighborhood transformation, including housing, including vacancy, including, by the way, this is not directly within CDA's remit, but safe streets, which the city has been investing significantly in. So, next slide. We also know, again, drilling in on housing, the city has about 140,000 households, of which about 77,500 are tenants, and about 60,000 are owner occupants. We know that there's significant cost burdens in both groups. Among homeowners, about 15,000 or about 25% are cost burden, meaning that they pay more than 30% of their income towards mortgages and utilities and property taxes every year. That's not even counting house maintenance costs, so we know that the real cost burden is even higher than the $77 million that we see here on an annual basis, that these 15,000 homeowners pay more than they can afford each year. On the rental side, it's just as bad, if not worse. We have about half of our city's tenants are cost burden, 36,500 roughly. And collectively, they pay more than $173 million more than they can afford towards rent and utilities each year. So we know there's an extraordinary need, and that's driving these investments as well. Next slide. And here you can see the housing production pipeline that we've expanded over the last 4 years. The city has committed about $100 million towards housing development, which is driving the development of over 3,500 units. To put this in context, between 2015 and 2019, the city subsidized the development of about 1,000 units. So we've more than tripled that affordable housing production pipeline. And we've also diversified it. Between 2015 and 2019, there were 65 for sale homes. Now we have over 200 in the development pipeline. Between 2015 and 2019, we're only 39 homes under 30% AMI. Now again, it's actually over 500. So we've dramatically both expanded and diversified this pipeline. Next slide. In partnership with the Affordable Housing Commission, SLDC, and dozens of developer partners. And then all of our investments are really guided by the Economic Justice Index, where, as I mentioned, equity is preconditioned growth. And so we are seeking to use affordable housing investments as a way to drive neighborhood revitalization by focusing resources on the neighborhoods that need it most. And you can see that in this Economic Justice Index, which is based on metrics like life expectancy, violence, crime rates, health outcomes, income, property values, etc. Next slide. Another additional tool that we are leveraging is the market value analysis. And we actually updated this in 2024 as part of the city's consolidated plan. And you can find this in a lot more detail online, but encourage all our developers to leverage this as a tool as well, because it's really quite granular. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see the data that's based on includes property values, median sales prices, residential permits, sales, distress sales data, vacant building data, and a variety of other census and market data. So this has been a really rich data analysis that informs our work. And in the NOFA, something you'll note is that there are geographic priorities associated with the Economic Justice Index and market value analysis. Next slide. A word about our housing production work and the different programs that go along with it. I've talked about our construction subsidies, but I also want to emphasize the home repair work has been scaled dramatically under Bill's leadership, as has the support that we're providing to homeowners and prospective homeowners. Under Home STL, we are providing up to $50,000 down payment assistance to prospective first-time home buyers, and that's leveraging significant mortgages, and that's a program that we're managing in partnership with SLDC and Stifel. And then the Real Estate Tax Assistance Fund is for the first time we're able to help homeowners who are on the verge of losing their home due to property tax liabilities, and for an average payment of less than $5,000 per family, we've been able to save in partnership with the Department of Human Services and Park Central Development over 100 owner-occupied homeowners from losing their homes, and that both helps keep the fabric of our neighborhood intact and helps seniors, in particular, many of these are seniors from being displaced. Next slide. And then the final point to make before we dive into NOFAs is that our theory of change here is really about making markets and catalyze sustainable growth. And a really good example of that is in Jeff Vanderloop here at the corner of Natural Ridge and Grand, where we invested about $5 million in ARPA funds to develop about 20 homes on these corners, on Heber and right at that intersection of Natural Bridge and Grand. And these were the first homes, the first mortgages originated in these neighborhoods in well over a decade. And now we're seeing these homes sell for around $150,000. What that does is it creates the market where now our hope is that developers, CDCs, others can go to a bank, use these as comps and say, hey, if $100,000 loan to rehab this home into a for sale home makes sense because I have this comp that hasn't existed for well over a decade. And so our theory of change here is, and we know, by the way, that this critical intersection because it's the proposed terminus of both the Brickline Greenway as well as the North-South Metro Link, that we can target and make focused investments to catalyze longer term change. And here we're also pairing that with investments into Herbert Hoover Boys and Girls Club, a youth golf community complex, as well as into other partners along this corridor. Next slide. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the specific funding opportunities that we are making available this round. And there's four primary ones. The first is up to $6 million in CDBG and home funds for affordable housing development. That's both rental and for sale. These is our these are traditional level. We've done this just about every year for at least a decade, if not more. And the way these funds work is that they take the form in the case of for sale developments. It's a forgivable loan that, let's say that you're building the home for $300,000 and you are seeking to sell it for $180,000, then we would provide that $120,000 gap financing with a forgivable loan that is then forgiven upon compliance with the affordability requirements. And these are required to sell these homes, the developers required to sell the homes to a low to moderate income individual under 80% AMI, which for a family of four is about $85,000. For an individual is about $55,000. And then also there's an affordability restriction on the home buyer as well, who enters into an agreement with the city for home ownership assistance in exchange for keeping the home affordable for an extended period of time. So that's how the for sale side works. On the rental side, it's a repayable loan that is typically subordinate to other debt on the project. And depending on the structure of the deal, can take different forms, whether it's a LIHTC deal, low income housing tax credit deal, or another type of development. But those are typically structured as repayable subordinate loans. And happy to answer more questions about that, but key thing to note is that we are planning to issue it on March 14th and having to post it on June 13th. And again, there will be that long workshop on April 24th. Something we'll note again at the workshop, and actually you'll note that in here, first time applicants are required to attend that workshop because we really think we see so often first time applicants struggle or make mistakes on the pro forma, which is the most technical piece of the application, is this really detailed spreadsheet. And so we really want to go through it with folks in detail, answer questions, and make sure that we're setting applicants up for success.
Excuse me, the mandatory date for that is?
It's on April 24th. And from 9 to 4, but it'll also be made available online. And if you can't make it on April 24th, we'll also accept proof that you saw the online webinar. I'll also note in general about how we are selecting projects. Again, every project is reviewed by 3 CDA staff independently. What they are looking for are the evaluation criteria included in our NOFA, that includes the applicant's qualifications and experience, the financial feasibility of the project, a track record for rental development of responsible management, accessible and sustainable design. Again, for rental properties, a strong supportive services plan or evidence of amenities within the neighborhood. City properties, we also prioritize LRA lots and buildings, as well as projects that are developed in coordination with other neighborhood investments and that have neighborhood transformation potential, have support from the community. There's also bonus points, again, for development of city property and LRA property. There's bonus points for rehabilitation of vacant buildings. There's bonus points for projects with a total development cost of less than 250,000 per unit. There's bonus points for projects with a CDA subsidy cost per unit of less than 100,000. There's even more bonus points for projects with a CDA subsidy cost per unit of less than 50,000. There's bonus points for projects with 3 bedrooms or more, because we know that that's a need and gap in the market. There's bonus points for projects with used cement board, LP smart board, or steel siding, or other more durable materials in lieu of vinyl. That's for new construction, obviously for rehab. It's different. We also, for new construction, want to see at least 5/8 of an inch drywall for interior partition, again, from a quality perspective. And then we also do provide bonus points for manufactured housing and other types of more innovative housing costs that can bring costs down. We also have bonus points for applicants for city residents, for businesses incorporated in the city, as well as applicants for MWPE businesses. And then finally, there are geographic priorities, as I noted, associated with the Economic Justice Index, with proximity to community assets like transit, like public schools, like parks, grocery stores, health clinics, rec centers, well, libraries, because basically we want to develop housing near amenities as well. And then there's an additional 5 bonus points to projects in economic justice demonstration areas, including Walnut Park East and West, the Project Connect Geography, the MLK Boulevard, and Dutchtown. And that's all in the NOFA, specifically on pages 7, 8, and 9. I thought we had a question.
Oh, I know I do. So you mentioned, so for first time developers, is this not available or do we have to partner with someone with extensive experience?
No, this is available for first-time developers, but would strongly encourage you to attend, not encourage, first-time applicants are required to attend that training. And frankly, federal funds are sticky and require a lot of paperwork, and so would encourage you to at least have conversations with other with developers who have received CDA funds in the past. And those are all publicly available on our website to learn a little bit about the capacities that are required to successfully manage a CDA grant. And again, we will go over this all in more detail on April 20th.
Okay, but you also said that we're looking for preference. So if I'm a new developer and my development project, which I know it's not, but meets the 250,000 threshold, you would strongly look at that because you guys have preferences.
There will be bonus points. So the way it works is that each project is reviewed, scored by our staff, by 3 staff independently, who also apply the bonus points and geographic priorities. We average those out and then we set thresholds. And then the way we do the thresholds is basically everything above a certain threshold comes to the executive director. And the executive director makes a final selection of a portfolio of projects. And that final selection is anything above that threshold. I review those projects, or whoever the executive directors reviews those projects and makes the final decisions. And the reason why we do this is because the evaluation is done for projects individually, right? But at the end of the day, what we're seeking is the portfolio of projects that's going to have the greatest impact for the city. And so, for example, it's possible that on a pure scoring basis, all of the rental projects, all of the LIHTC projects score the best, right? Because these are all big projects that leverage funds the most, et cetera, but we actually want to diversify.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. So I'm going to continue now to the next funding opportunity. Again, I mentioned there were 4 in total, but we can go to the next slide. And so the next one is about $4.9 million in home ARP funds, which are available to support permanent, supportive, and emergency housing. Home ARP funds are a special set of HUD funds that can be used to serve the following 4 qualifying populations: individuals who are unhoused, individuals who are at risk of becoming unhoused, individuals who are victims of domestic violence or sexual assault, and individuals who struggle with mental health and substance abuse and other challenges. So these funds are really focused on helping and supporting our most vulnerable residents, which is why we are prioritizing both permanent supportive, but also emergency housing, such as non-congregate shelter and other uses. And so encourage applicants to apply, and happy to answer any questions about these as well. The evaluation criteria are similar in terms of looking at qualifications, experience, looking in particular at the support services plan, and the experience the applicant is working with these vulnerable populations, as well as the bonus points and geographic priorities, which I mentioned earlier. If we, and the timeline is the same, and we'll go over and be able to answer any more detailed questions about this on April 24th as well. Next slide. Our next funding opportunity is really unique. It's something that we haven't done before and that we applied to HUD for funding to do, and we're very grateful to be awarded and provided that support. And so this is part of our pro-housing branch. So we were awarded a $7 million grant by HUD to do a variety of, and PRO stands for Pathways to Reducing Obstacles to Affordable Housing. And so some of the funds are going towards updating the city's zoning code to bring down barriers to the development of affordable housing. Some of the funds are going to other planning and strategic initiatives. But we also included $3.25 million for housing reduction. But one of the things that we've learned is the NOFAs that I've just described, the previous two, are driven by its right. Developers tell us, here's the project that I want to do, here are the parcels. Here's, by the way, something I should have mentioned is we do need proof of site control, either ownership or an option. An option is fine, so long as it's a valid option. But we do need that proof of site control. But it's driven by developers, it's driven by the applicant. Here we're flipping it, and it's really a model that a lot of other cities have used to great effect in terms of accelerating development and also bringing down costs. Basically, here the city is identifying. Here's the geography that we want to develop. It's actually owned by the city. It's primarily LRA property, and we want developers to compete to show us who can develop this geography at the lowest cost for the most impact. And so this one is really focused, and one of the reasons why we're taking this public comment is because we really want to hear from the community feedback on the geographies that we are prioritizing. But what we told HUD is that we would be prioritizing the funds along and around the city's Dr. Martin Luther King Drive demonstration area. And in particular, that we would be concentrating the funds into a couple of square block focus area, prioritizing the development of sites owned or acquired by the Land Reutilization Authority within walking distance to schools such as Sumner High School, a historic neighborhood anchor, and in close proximity to transit and other amenities, including the Monarch Economic Mobility Center. Essentially, our kind of theory is cities making a big investment in the Monarch Economic Mobility Center, which I also like to call City Hall North, because it's where LRA, the Office of Violence Prevention, Slate, and other city offices will be housed, as well as a modular building manufacturer. And this economic mobility campus needs housing as well for the folks who will be going through job training and other development programs there. And as an anchor, we also want to fill in and really develop the parts of the greater Bill that are lie between the Monarch and Sumner High School. And so we've identified, based on engagement with the community, the planning department is leading a neighborhood plan for the Ville and Greater Ville, and we've met with that neighborhood planning committee. And we've identified a few blocks in particular along the 4200 block area of Evans, Aldine, Cobrillion, Garfield, where we think we can really connect. And in particular, some of these blocks are currently in the very rough condition. And we think that by concentrating this 3.25 million there, and inviting developers to apply, there may be a few buildings that can be rehabbed, and we hope so, but in part, primarily it's going to be infill new construction. In particular, we're hoping to see duplexes, triplexes, or families proposed, that we can, really clean up, and revitalize this area. And in so doing, there's already a little community of owner occupants at 12 homes, that sit just south of the CARE SPL clinic, just along Rowan Market. And the MLK corridor itself, SLBC is making deep investments into revitalizing the MLK corridor. You know, between that, we can have a really beautified and strong redensified neighborhood between the Monarch and Sumner High School. So that's kind of our theory of change, but we want to solicit public input and continue this dialogue. But again, that's a unique approach. Go ahead.
What
We
is
have,
the location of the Monarch? Is that what you're saying, the Monarch, is that what you call the economic ability? Yeah. Okay.
that's on 3940 Dr. Martin Luther King Drive. It's about it's MLK and Vandeventer. It was the intersection. It's the former Killark Electric building, if you're familiar with that. So that's what I'm referring to as the project.
Thank you.
And the city recently acquired and is working to rehabilitate it.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
The question was, where is the Monarch Economic Mobility Campus? And the answer is 3940 Dr. Martin Luther King Drive. Next slide. So our fourth and final funding opportunity here is 1.5 million in economic development sales tax funds for neighborhood plan implementation. This is also a unique funding opportunity because it is not HUD funded. This is local tax money, economic development sales tax. And in particular, these are funds that were, you may recall, approved by city voters in 2017. And one of the uses of them, it was 60% towards transit and North-South Metro, 10% towards public safety, 10% towards infrastructure, 10% towards workforce development, and 10% towards neighborhood revitalization. And this is the neighborhood revitalization component. And specifically, one of the things that the bill called for is for neighborhood plan implementation. And so again, this is focused funding. We ran this funding cycle for the first time last year. And we funded the Our Place initiatives and Dutchtown South Community Corporation's initiatives to revitalize the Jefferson Gravois corridor. That's part of an approved neighborhood plan, as well as Cornerstone CDC's efforts to implement the West End plan. And then currently we hope to do this again in this coming year and are excited to see the proposals for neighborhood plan implementation. I believe that the eligible geographies now, excluding the two that we previously awarded, that have had a neighborhood plan approved by the Planning Commission in the last 5 to 6 years, are the North Central Plan, which includes parts of Covenant Blue, JBL, and Grand Center, as well as the downtown design plan, as well as the Skingrd Oliver plan. But there's a lot of other planning processes in the works, including Project Connect, including the bill and greater bill, and others that will be eligible to apply for these funds in the future. I think that brings our presentation to a conclusion. But happy to answer any questions that folks may have. Russell?
Are these funds federal funds, do you have these federal funds or you have to apply for them?
CDA has been awarded these federal funds. However, our partners need to apply to CDA for them. However, I should note that these are the funds are, each funding source is different and unique. So I'll talk about each of those. The question for the public is essentially, what is the status of these funds from a federal perspective? So the economic development sales tax funds are local tax funds, so there's no question there. The home ARP funds, the 4.9 million for permanent support housing, those have been contractually obligated to the city of St. Louis. And so we feel confident, although at a general level, the city operates with HUD on a reimbursement basis, just like our partners operate with us for the most part. And what that means is essentially, we enter into a grant agreement with HUD. HUD commits these funds. The grant agreement says HUD will make these funds available to the city. We consider that a binding contractual obligation. There was just recently Supreme Court order on the $2 billion in foreign aid, where the Supreme Court did confirm that the federal government, like anyone else, needs to fulfill its contractual obligations. Similarly, in this case, we have that contractual obligation, but we incur costs. And then we draw down funds from the federal government on a reimbursement basis. With the $6 million in CDBG and home funds, that's a little different. I want to be really transparent about that. These are 2025 CDBG and home dollars, and these actually have not yet been appropriated by Congress. We run this funding cycle at this point. We've done it every year because these appropriations have been reliable, right? And we want to run the housing cycle now so that we get a jump start, because the housing development cycle takes so long to begin with. So we've done this on the schedule, but there's more federal uncertainty, obviously, than ever before. I will say that thus far, the budget resolutions and continuing resolutions that we've seen come out of Congress obviously cut a lot of vital programs like Medicaid, like food stamps, and many others. But thus far, HUD isn't obviously on the chopping block. That's not to say it may not be in the future. But at this point, we don't see indications that, actually, I should note that HUD staff are on the chopping block, and our hearts go out to a lot of HUD staff that have lost their jobs, as well as other federal staff. But as for the budgets for the programs themselves, we are not seeing cuts yet. We may in the future, and keep you apprised as that moves forward.
Thank you very much.
So, in saying all of that, and I don't know that you can answer that, but, clearly, as a developer, I would be very nervous, with these funds, with the climate that we're in. So, is there any plan B, or should we, if we're thinking about development, maybe enter into an agreement with the bank for gap financing, knowing that, okay, hey, we've applied for this, but this may happen, so this is the fallback. I mean, are there any conversations with that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and to repeat the question for our virtual audience who may not have heard, it's about how to manage these risks associated with federal funds in this dynamic federal environment, and whether there's any plan Bs. And the first thing is, as a developer, I would always encourage you to seek out other sources of funding and diversify essentially your options. I'll say as a city that I'm truly hopeful that we are able to raise additional local funds to invest in the development of housing. I think the need is extraordinary. I think the engagement that we do with the public consistently reaffirms that as a priority. And so I am hopeful that the city will commit other local funds, potentially ramp settlement or other funds, to help keep this work going should federal funding fall through. But I'm certainly not in a place to make any sort of commitments on that. But we're certainly trying to develop alternatives and explore alternatives. Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Maybe I missed it though, as a new developer, are there any funds to, sort of like pre-site funds for drawings and different things like that to submit the proposal to you guys?
The question that was asked was about pre-development funding to support the development, design, engineering, site prep, et cetera, acquisition, prior to submitting a proposal. And the short answer is that with HUD funds are earned. That is something that we were able to do with ARPA funds through our neighborhood transformation grants proposal, and we love doing. It's a little risky, but it's well worth it to support developers. But unfortunately, with CDBG in the home, what we are required to do is meet a national objective, and the national objective in this case is the development of housing. And so if we invest solely in pre-development and then that final project never takes place, we're actually on the hook to repay that HUD. And so that's why the way that our funding works, with HUD dollars, is very focused on housing production. Again, I think with local funding, that is something that we could look at, and it's certainly something that we could look at under neighborhood plan implementation and the economic development sales tax. If the same community groups that developed that neighborhood plan told us, hey, in order to move this forward, we need to invest into this pre-development work, that could be a compelling application with community support and other support. Let me also add, I didn't mention this as I was going through it, but the pro-housing funds are also appropriated and under contract with the federal government. So everything I said about home art funds applies to the pro-housing funds as well. We do have a grant agreement with the federal government that we consider binding and would be willing to defend those contractual rights. Do we have any questions from the public online?
No, not seen any in the chat, and I've also invited folks, just raise your hand and we'll bring you on live. Like a kind of radio show here, or just put them in the chat and we'll read them out so everyone can hear your question. And with that, Anne has raised their hand, so I'm gonna bring Anne in.
Yeah, hi. Our organization applied last year for the neighborhood transformation grants, and I'm wondering if we can get feedback on that proposal that was unsuccessful before we apply for the next one.
Did you have a debrief out of curiosity? After the application?
We did on, sorry, I've got dogs barking. We did on one grant, but not on the tax supported one.
Got it. In that case, we can certainly try and schedule that. But on March 14th, we do go into our quiet period once the funding opportunity opens. And once we're in there, basically what that means is that any questions that we answer, we answer publicly. So you can submit questions to us and we'll answer them. And we'll post our answers publicly. You can come to our workshop on April 24th and we'll answer questions that applicants may have again publicly. But unfortunately, unless we can get it scheduled pretty quickly, we may not be able to do that debrief. But I would encourage you to follow up immediately after this hearing and we'll try and schedule that debrief. Because every applicant is entitled to a debrief where we provide that feedback or overview of how we evaluated that application. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. What's your schedule this week?
Luke and Kevin on our team will try and get it scheduled as quickly as possible. Although frankly, I'm probably not going to be the best person to provide that feedback because I don't personally review any applications, at least until the very end of the process. It's really our staff. So we'll work to get that scheduled.
Thank you.
Of course.
And I'm putting my email in the chat and I'll we'll get you connected, okay?
Before we go to you, Russell, I have another question here.
I guess you mentioned this early in your presentation, you talked about systematic cutback. And I just wanted to know, was that management or was it economic driven? Because you really didn't expound on that.
Yeah, so that was a reference really at the federal level to the trend since 1980 and since Reagan took office in 1980 to the reduction in funding for housing and urban development programs, including CDBG. Again, if you just indexed the level at which the federal government was funding these programs in 1980 to inflation, the city of St. Louis would receive today, instead of $18 million in CDBG funds, to support this work closer to $90 million. And so it would be the equivalent, essentially, the way I like to think about it, of us having ARPA every year. ARPA being the American Rescue Plan Act and the one-time infusion of $498 million, which we've spent between 21 and 26 over a period of about 6 years. That infusion of $90 million a year would be about the equivalent. And so we've obviously come to see ARPA as a once in a generation opportunity, and it is because there have been such systematic cutbacks at the federal level consistently from 1980 to the present. But the truth is that there are other systems of funding the federal government that would make ARPA not an exception but the norm, right? And the truth is that the housing need obviously justifies that. And frankly, from a budgetary perspective, again, in 1980, that funding was 3.7 billion. In 2024, it was 3.3 billion. So it's not that it's been cut significantly in nominal terms, right? But that 3.3 billion obviously goes a lot less far today than it did in 1980. And so it's that kind of invisible cutting that happens. But conversely, if it really had kept up with inflation, we'd be looking at about 14 billion. And that difference of about $10 billion or $11 billion between the 3.3 billion it is today to the 14 billion that it should be, in my mind. From a federal budgeting perspective, it's not very significant, at least compared to the trillions of dollars federal budget. I'm gonna stop there before I get myself in trouble.
Let's bring Bobby, who has his hand raised on. Hey, Bobby, can you hear us? Are you
Yes.
there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, you're in the room with us. Go ahead.
Okay, I know you had mentioned about the development stuff in the Ville and Greater Ville. Is any of these funds available to purchase and rehab some of the existing school buildings?
Certainly, yes. In particular, the funding opportunities that you would want to look at there would probably be CDBG/home up to $6 million in CDBG and home funds. And if you were looking at serving qualifying population, like folks who are unhoused or at risk of becoming unhoused or meet the other qualifying population criteria I listed earlier, the pro-housing funds, the home ARP funds. The only reason I'm not sure about the pro-housing funds is that I don't know if there will be a vacant school in the geography that we select. And frankly, the geographies that we're selecting are focused on city-controlled property that we can turn around and develop in a more expeditious manner than a vacant school that may not be owned by the city and where site control might be more challenging. But I would strongly encourage you to consider if you can secure site control, the CDBG/home funding opportunity and the home ARP funding opportunities. And there are bonus points associated with rehabbing vacant buildings. And we are currently supporting the rehabilitation of a couple of vacant schools, including Baden School and Elliott School. And it's something that we understand the transformative impact that can have and how these historic community anchors really need to be revitalized to serve as community anchors moving forward.
Yeah, because both of the school buildings that I'm looking, they are in these development zones. And they're part of centered somewhere near and around Sumner as well. So that's kind of, and I know we've had some issues with SLPS over the years about selling them and not selling them and selling them. So that's kind of why I was kind of asking, and it would help if we had this support, to approach them again.
Absolutely. What I would encourage you to do is submit a public comment where you tell us that these two schools are development priorities and encourage us to include them in our pro-housing sites. I can't guarantee we will, and even if we don't, CDBG and home ARP are going to be the best bets. But most certainly, we haven't finalized the pro-housing sites, and so that public comment would be welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
When you were talking about looking at proposals, does the public have, or do you have a process for the public to review, proposals that you guys, grant money to previously proposals that were denied?
So historically we've not, but let me repeat the question. Is there an opportunity for the public to review the proposals that we've awarded and the proposals that we've denied. And the answer is that historically, we have not really included this as part of our processes, but all of our documents are public documents. And moving forward, it is something that I'd like to start doing in some way. I think we need to figure out the right way to do it. But for example, with pro housing, one of the things that we are committed to is including the residents in that. I mentioned that there's currently a neighborhood planning process going in Bill and Greater Bill, and we're committed to including that neighborhood planning committee and residents in that selection process. The way I think about it is that residents should have a strong voice, but not necessarily a veto in the process. At the end of the day, it's still a city-driven selection process. And honestly, if we give actual selection power to the community, wind up in a lot of, from a compliance perspective, a lot of potential conflicts of interest and others. But I think that having the neighborhood review these proposals from developers for the redevelopment of these sites and these blocks will really ultimately improve the quality of our selection process and the quality of the projects that are selected. So that's something that we're certainly looking at doing. Again, in my mind, the way the process likely will work is when we receive applications, we first of all conduct intake, then we do a eligibility and completeness review. I don't think it makes sense to send proposals that we conclude are not eligible or complete to the community. I think that'll just create confusion. But I think once we do that eligibility and completeness review and we have our bank or a bench of eligible and complete projects, that's where we can bring those to the community to support that selection process. So that's something that we'll be piloting in pro housing, and we'll take what we learned from that and look at applying it to other funding processes in the future.
And if you're on Zoom, you can go ahead and just raise your hand and we'll bring you in the room. Or if you prefer, just type your question in the chat and we will read it out loud for everyone here at 1520 Market and also in Zoom. Not seeing any questions right now. I'll just add that this public hearing is for public comment on the NOFAs before they are finalized and officially released on Friday, 314 day, the 14th of March. So if you do have public comments, there are instructions in each NOFA document. As you can see in the chat, you can send a written public comment there to cda@stlewis-mo.gov. I'm putting a link in the chat. Everyone on this Zoom probably already knows about this webpage, but the webpage that hosts all these current neighborhood transformation grant draft NOFAs, notice of funding availability.
Thank you, Tommy, for that. Really want to uplift. If you do have a public comment, please email us at cba@stlouis-mo.gov.
Okay, I'm seeing in our Zoom Q&A, there's an issue with the chat. So anyway, this question is, Alan says, I have a 7,000 square foot building that we would like to reconstruct into permanent housing with supportive services. The building is on the 1300 block of North Keens Highway. It is adjacent to a church. We're thinking of selling this church building to be reconstructed into permanent housing. And they've asked me to contact them, which I will.
Yeah, and I would encourage Alan to, if he's interested in applying for funds, to join us at a workshop on April 24th in person here at 1520. And so we can answer questions that they may have regarding the pro forma. Yes, yes.
Is this being taped so we can review it later, just in case we missed some of the things that we discussed?
The question is whether this is being taped, and the answer is yes. This entire public hearing will be available on YouTube at the City of St. Louis page.
Yes, it's streaming live now on YouTube, so, and a link to the stream is on the homepage of the city's website, so.
I'm also seeing another question in the chat asking whether to qualify for the grant, you need additional financing to support the project. And the answer is, it really depends on the project. In general, having leverage, having additional financing, will strengthen the application. And there's certainly projects that we will not fund without a full capital stack. We're not going to fund, for example, a project where even with the CDA award, for for sale home, it's still not going to be able to happen because we want, once we fund it, it to be able to happen. However, the one exception is that with really large projects that have really complex capital stacks, and in particular, what I'm thinking about is the LIHTC projects, low-income housing tax credit projects that can be tens of millions of dollars. There, we definitely want to see evidence of other financing in place, but we understand that sometimes these deals may not have 100% complete capital stacks. And so we may be willing to fund that on the front end of, for example, an application for LIHTC funding. Because that's a way that the city can also help express its priorities to the state.
And the Q&A, Stan is asking, I own a property that I would like to convert to housing, but the cost of construction far exceeds what I can sell to make a profit. What is the maximum funding award from the NOFA that would be able to, CDA would be able to provide for a project like this?
There is no absolute cap included in the NOFA, although perhaps there should be. I can tell you that we very rarely make awards in excess of $1 million. We do it on occasion for very large projects that may be 20 or $30 million. But we very rarely make awards in excess of 1 million. And then we also look at it very strongly on a cost per unit basis. And so you can look at those points included in the NOFA. Including, we like to see projects that are, we have bonus points for projects that are less than $250,000 per unit total development cost with a CDA contribution of less than 100,000. So essentially what I'm saying is that we may do a larger award in the case of a very large project with a lot of units where the CDA cost per unit might still be very low. It might be a $25,000 CDA cost per unit, but we're putting $2 million into it. So there's a really significant return from a public perspective. So certainly for single family homes, very rarely would we do more than 200,000 per unit. And for a CDA contribution, although again, there are exceptions with rehabs that can be very expensive and other cases. So hopefully that answers that question. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Do we have any other questions here and the? With that, that brings this public hearing to a close. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on April 24th. And actually, let me quickly note that April 24th is one piece of Community Development Week, and that we'll actually have events April 21st through 25th all week. And April 24th is the date that we're dedicating to this workshop and training. But please sign up for our newsletter and keep an eye out for announcements regarding events for community development.
We have some late comers,
That
we have
was-
two more.
Let's answer the question.
In the chat, this person asked, for successful projects funded for rentals, is this a forgivable loan? And then I'm not sure that they might need to clarify. Do you take a portion of the rental income? Does CDA? So we'll try and answer
Yeah,
it like that.
The answer to that question is that our rental funding is structured as payable loan. However, it is subordinate to other debt on the project for the most part. And so I might pass to Bill to give more detail, but essentially, if there is surplus rental income after other debt is paid off, or we would take a portion of that income for repayment of that repayable loan. But many CDA rental loans are not ultimately repaid. So I don't know if Bill, you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I'll just say that generally on rental projects, as Noah said, it is repayable. And the rule of thumb is around 25% of net annual cash flow has to be repaid. So there has to be cash flow. Some of these projects don't have a lot of cash flow, so it kind of depends. It's a situation, it's case by case basis, but we do a lot of rental projects and we are, repaying.
I also see the question in the chat about April 20th, 2025 is the key date for, and the answer is it's actually April 24th, 2025 is our NOFA workshop from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Lunch will be provided here in this room, 1520 Market Street, second floor boardroom. Our team will be going through in detail the NOFA and in particular the pro forma. Attending and reviewing this training is mandatory for first-time applicants, in part because we see a lot of first-time applicants struggle with the pro forma, which is this very detailed spreadsheet, and we want to set folks up for success and ensure that you have all the information you need to submit, because we know people put a lot of work into their applications, and we don't want to be in a position where we then have to deny those because the applications are incomplete or ineligible. So we want to help set folks up for success with this detailed training. Again, April 24th.
And I'm assuming because you're providing lunch that there's going to be a registration link of some sort. Is
Yes,
that out now or?
it's not out yet, but yes, there will be.
Okay.
The last call, if there are any questions in the room or on Zoom, put them in the chat. Or go ahead and raise your hand.
And make sure when you start the NOFA that you do download the latest version of the NOFA that will be released in its final form on March 14th. So there may be minor edits following this public comment and input, and we'll release that final version on Friday. All right, thank you all for your time. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Jerry. STL TV team.
Oh, thank you. Can you do it for
Hey, Jerry, we can go ahead and administrate.
What is looking like first?